This is an open letter for Uncle Sam. Love you, man. Here's the thing, Uncle Sam. Uh, Thank you very much to the founding fathers who really were the ones who put pen to paper and separated the state from religion, the state and the church. That was the founding fathers really put pen to the paper and separated the church from the state, and stated that Uncle Sam's land does not have an official church, official religion. There's no sanctioning of one of the branches of Christianity as the official religion. And there's the simple reason for that was because they don't want to. They saw what happened in Europe with all this Christian sect start killing each other. Not started all through the ages. Different, Christianity broke itself up to many different sects, and these sects, found the differences in their belief system as reason enough to, slaughter each other. Anyway, so they saw that they came to the new world, and the founding fathers, scholars and not very religious, thank God, scholars put pen to paper and said, okay, we don't recognize a state religion. It's a separation of state and church, and thank God for that. Now, I'm gonna pass over the fact that how religion is trying to, for the past 50 years, has been trying to find its way back to the state, and they started this, backdoor attack of the religion to the state, on the state, started from around the same time they put the "In God We Trust" on the money. From around the same time they started printing "In God We Trust" on money, is around the same time that I have a feeling that the United States no longer follows the founding fathers, because you can't say that God applies to everybody. No, not everybody believes in God, for one, and two, a lot of other people call their God by different name. They don't call him God. So you wanna, like the fucking Indians, you want to spell God in 15 different languages on the money. You want to go that route, sort of like, oh no, we mean all gods. Whatever you believe in, we put it on money. The name of whoever you believe in, we put it on money. Like Indians fucking have to write in for 15 different languages, 5 rupees in 15 different languages. So all the different ethnicities of India, they all, none of them feel left out. Democracy. Great. Anyway, no, you don't want to do that. You just want to remove the word God from the money. It's sort of, what do you mean in God we trust? The founding father went out of their way to spell it out, that we don't sanction any religion. The state does not sanction any religion. What does that tell you? That means we don't, not only it means we accept all of them, but it also means we accept none of them. When the state does not sanction a religion, you may think that it's actually saying, oh, we accept all of them, but, Judeo-Christian is better, but we accept all of them. But no, it can be translated the other way. The state shall sanction no religion, no official religion, means we don't believe none of them. The guys who wrote this down may mean that we don't believe none of them. Anyway, that aside, this clip is about separation of commerce and state. We saw that separation of church and state more or less has worked for everybody, especially, the Europeans who decided to separate the church from the state benefited a lot except for the fucking British, because they're still, you know, their queen is the head of their church as well. So not only they have kept a very, very, you know, retarded form of governance with the queen as the head of state, very retarded, very backward form of government is still going on in England, but also they, you know, they still have kept the church as part of the state in England. The country that, you know, keeps screaming at the back of Uncle Sam's wagon that we are the civilization, we lead the civilization of the world. These guys still have a state-sanctioned Church of England. These guys still have Church of England, so the head of state is the head of the church as well. How backward can a country be? About a couple of hundred years ago, at least the Europeans, the pinkskins, and, you know, their colonies realized that, okay, let's separate the church and the state, but not the fucking British. So here's the thing: since everybody separated the church from the state, and, you know, after the Dark Ages, they learned their lesson of separation of church from the state. Now, before we go into the commercial dark ages, which I think we are in right now, commercial dark ages, in which, because the commerce and state are so intertwined, that we are having a dark ages of commercial dark ages, in which, you know, there is food but cannot be distributed between all, or those who need it, we can't do that because, you know, it's commerce. They have to pay for it, and if they don't have to, you know, they don't have the money to pay for it, I guess they're going to sleep hungry. So where the product is there, but we are, you know, we are not, you know, we are very particular about it, and we say, you know, everybody has to pay to eat, and so the productivity is there. So, and my productivity can be brought about by a few robots that I own. I mean, for example, these people who own the simplest form of robot, the people who own the candy machines and these, you know, soda pop machines. These are a kind of very primitive robots. They're stationary. You approach them, you give them a command, as well as the price of a product, and they dispense of the product for you. So this is the simplest form of robot, are these vending machines. A person who has these vending machines and who has a bunch of these robots working for that person. Now, as we go forward, these robots become more interesting and more productive. But these primitive forms of robots shows that the model doesn't work. That means this person can service many of these robots, and these robots are servicing him, and without, you know, participation from any other human being, he is having a productivity, that he accumulates the productivity of all these robots. One human has accumulated the productivity of many robots that are working for him. So that shows that this mechanization, automation, and these robotics eventually, already have pushed, you know, a large portion of population, especially the portion of population that was more apt for physical activity. The black and brown folks like me, who are, you know, more apt for physical activity, had been pushed out of, you know, society, workforce, because workforce have been mechanized. You know, you don't need cotton pickers anymore because it has been mechanized. It doesn't make sense to pay a person to do the job when a machine can do it much faster, much cleaner, much better, much more, you know, even you can argue eco-friendly if if it's not using diesel, if it's using solar power. I mean, even you can call it even eco-friendly. So the point is this: you have to separate commerce from the state. I went off topic. Commerce and state, just like the church was separated from the state, commerce needs to be separated from the state, should be separated from the state. And there is we have seen it. What I'm trying to say is, if we were living before separation of church and state, if we were living before then, right now, I would, you wouldn't be, nobody would be surprised if suddenly the transportation secretary is a bishop. His education has not been in transportation, doesn't matter. If we were living in the dark ages right now, that means the church and the state hadn't separated yet. At that time, it was common for the ruler of the land, whoever was the king or whoever was the minister or whatever, first minister or the king or whoever the fuck was taking care of the land, it was not uncommon for himself to be of the clergy, the head of the state. Just a couple of hundred years ago in Europe, a couple of hundred years ago, it wasn't uncommon to have a religious person as the head of state, as it is fucking in the Middle East right now. At that time, it was common in Europe. That was the Dark Ages. The head of churches of different tribes and different areas were sort of their head of state. Some of them had kings, but even the ones who had kings, the head of the church was basically, present even when the king was taking a shit. You see what I'm saying? The head of church was present all the time. It was, very close to power. So my point is this: that at that time it wasn't uncommon to see the energy secretary, to be a clergy, a bishop, a cardinal, or whatever the fuck. So it wouldn't be uncommon to see that the head of, secretary of treasury, another bishop or another cardinal, just as the head of the treasury of the land, of the tribe or whatever. So this was not uncommon. Was very common. The separation of church and state, the idea behind separation of church and state happened that we came out of the Dark Ages. That is known that, okay, we emerged from the Dark Ages. Okay, fine. And after we emerged from the Dark Ages, things are much better. When the church does not run your life, things are much better. Things are much more palatable because, church is a very conservative organization. You want to call it church, you want to call it mosque, you want to call it the synagogue, you want to call it a temple, whatever the fuck you call the place you go to pray or you hold dear, it's just a building. My point is this: that it's just a building, but the idea in that building, the idea that is being distributed in that building, is a very conservative idea, because the religion, whichever religion that you are from, is a very old religion. We're talking about the youngest one being 1400 years. This is the youngest one of the youngest one. Oh, there's still the Mormons with couple of hundred years of, I don't know, even if I'm not sure even if they're older than 100 years old. Anyway, the point is this: they promote an idea which was the norm of their time. So the religion's idea is that our morals should not move with time, but should stay stationary in time, exactly at the time that religion was invented. So at the time that the religion was invented by a very smart guy, I'm sure, or a couple of smart guys, or a whole bunch of smart guys sat down and wrote a book and you know, and sold it. The idea is this. The idea was, this is the way we live. Now, from now on, anybody who wants to be considered one of us has to live the same way. This is our perspective towards, you know, human beings. This is our perspective towards animals. This is our perspective towards, you know, clean and unclean. This is our perspective towards women. This is our perspective towards children. This is our perspective towards shit and kuft and zahramar. The point is this: that set of standards, the only thing religion does is just hands down these set of standards from way back when to every generation, hands it down to the next generation, and somehow they, you know, they think that if you set the keep the moral standards the same, everything will be fine. If we keep the moral standards of 1400 years ago today, everything will be fine. The only problem is we have to keep to those moral standards. Yeah, what the system doesn't get is that in years from now, I mean, you know, people have different concerns in their everyday life. You can't, you know, foresee what fucking kind of concerns they had in their everyday life. Since you can't foresee it, how you can, you know, make laws about it? You know, how can you make laws about it if you can't foresee it? How you can make a religion about it if you can't foresee that what the needs of a human will be in 1,000 years from now? What's his condition is going to be? What his needs are going to be? You know, what will be available to him? Whatever. You see what I'm saying? The condition, the environment, the needs, the wants. You don't know what's going to be later. So how can you set rules for that? So my point is this: religion, because it was understood, scholars realized that you cannot continue with the ways and means of, you know, a set point in time, but then your environment changes. You cannot, you know, the head of that church is the head of a dead body. The head of any church is the head of a dead body, because the body died 1400 years ago. The body died 2021 years ago. 2022 years ago. The body died then. That set of religious edict that was applicable at that time, that way of living no longer exists. Slavery was normal at that time, but no longer, you know, exists. So there is a whole bunch of, you know, verses in both fucking Quran and the fucking Bible and fucking everybody else, all of them. There are certain verses that applies specifically to slavery. Now, you know, you want to go get some slaves and see if those rules apply or not. The point is this: in 100 years from now, in 200 years from now, probably animal slaughter is going to be illegal, because, you know, societies have evolved, and they realize that, yeah, it's not a good idea to, you know, cut things off just because you want to consume the meat. You can, you know, order what you want to the computer, and, you know, or to the supermarket, and, you know, there are factories that they make meat. You can have as much as you want, and you don't have to kill anybody. So at that time, all those edicts about slaughter, all those, you know, rules and regulation about what to eat, what you can eat, what you can't eat, is it up, you know, you can't have a, you know, a kosher meat factory is a little, you know, outdated, because what the factory that produces meat. You can't really call it beef, lamb, or pork. It's meat. Okay, you can, stretch the muscle tissue a little more, or make it a little tougher or a little softer, and the same machine that produces pork can produce beef, because to the machine it's just it's just a matter of which chemical to put more where. That's it. There is no animal involved in the process of said production. So how all these religions that outlaw pork, you're wondering that, so you think that the same machine that produces beef produces pork, or similar machine that produces beef produces pork, so what's your beef? How can you distinguish them, and how would you want to distinguish them? Sort of like, they both produce meat, but let's keep the one that produces pork separate from keep the one that produces chicken. You're splitting hairs at that point. My point is this: we had the separation of because of all this silliness of trying to keep the moral standards of a specific time in the past alive, and the scholars understood that it's stupid to keep the morals, have the technological standards improve, life standards improve day by day, but the moral standards of exactly the date and the time to the year of the moral standards of that time, and all these silly hats and silly turbans and all of that goes back to that. Goes to the fact that this was the guy who invented this religion happened to be wearing that robe, and his wife used to wear such a robe. So these two robes, these two sets of clothes that the leaders of these churches, of these groups, these religions were wearing at that time, apparently we're supposed to continue wearing the same. So but the funny thing is, then you go and you see in for example Malaysia, the Muslim Malaysia, you see that the men have kept their traditional garb, but the women, they have worn the Saudi Arabian version of women's garb. So the women's garb was imported from Saudi Arabia. The idea behind the women's garb was in Malaysia was imported from Saudi Arabia, but the men kept their thing the same. So you have a lot of differences between men of Islamic world, difference in their dresses, but apparently their women are interchangeable, more or less. A little color differences, a little more or a little less, but the whole idea of covering it up and Anyway, this went with the religion. So the point is this: all of this made scholars realize we cannot have our moral standards tied to one point in time. So we want separation of church and state because church happens to be a very silly matter, and the state is a very serious matter, so we are going to separate the silly from us. Okay. They separated the silly from the state, the church from the state, and that was a good thing. And we saw that. Then, everybody got to read and write, and everybody could have become a scholar, and everybody, learned more about the environment around them. My point is something else. My point is this: it's time to separate commerce from the state. The example that I gave you, that if we were living at that time right now, the first minister could choose a bishop as a finance minister, or he can choose a cardinal as a treasurer, if we were living in the dark ages, the head of state could have done any of these. Just bring in the top layer of the church, some of the people from the top layer of the church, just sprinkle it within their administration. They don't do that anymore, thank God. You don't want the silly people in the serious business of the state. So they don't do that. After the separation of church and state, they don't do that. But you know what do they do now? They still continue doing. And what they're still continue doing is bringing the head of commerce and sprinkling them within their administration. The state is, the politics that this democracy is sprinkling, taking some from the heads of its commerce business, the commerce that takes place on the land. They take some of these heads of these commercial entities, these businesses. They take some of their heads and they sprinkle them over the state, at superior positions over the state. Mix them up with the civil servants, heads of businesses, those top layers of businesses. You take some of them and you mix them, and they used to do this with church and they stopped, thank God for that, but now they're still continuing to do it just with business. They're mixing commerce with the state to a large degree. And this whole idea of pay per play election, pay per play election, that's, we all, have to donate money in order for, somebody to be able to compete. And, the bar of competition is all, dollar denominated. You have to have some money to be able to participate in this race. If you don't have the money, then you're not going to be running anywhere. You can run, but you're not going to win, because a large part of it depends on how much, firepower you have. Firepower to what? You need to shoot. If you need to advertise your guy, if there is a need to advertise your guy, then that's not your guy. That's not a real good guy. People know good people. People hear about good people from far away. There is no reason to advertise a good guy. I mean, Bernie Sanders doesn't need advertisement. His life is his advertisement. You want to know about my life? Read the book. So, but somebody who hasn't lived a good life, he needs advertisements. So to keep repeating those very small clips of his life or her life that was nice, was good, those clips have to be attached next to each other and shown as an advertisement. This is our guy, this is our guy, this is our guy. Well, this motherfucker has lived a full life. I'm sure there's some, hours of it, is for your eyes only. We understand. So the point is this: there's no need for advertisement. But if you cut away the advertisement and say no single dollar should be spent on advertisement for elections, not a single dollar can change hand for the purpose of the election. This should be the law. You push commerce right out of politics. Again, back to examples of how commerce has continued after church has left the state. Commerce has stayed with the state. Commerce shall come off the state. Have you noticed that any president that goes in, couple of top guys, top lieutenants, couple of those top lieutenants that have been sprinkled within the civils from outside, from commerce side into the civil servant area, those consultant, whatever you want to call them, consultants or even secretaries. We have had treasury secretaries who worked for who's also still partners in, is still a partner, or maybe they have left their post and they're planning on going back after their stint in civil service, in the government. But the point is this: they're interchangeable, just like the church used to be interchangeable, and heads of churches could end up being having some kind of role in the administration of a state. Now the heads of commerce have they're given roles in administration of state. The secretaries are coming from Goldman Sachs or now from BlackRock. Doesn't matter. These are commercial people. You're mixing commerce and state. You're mixing commerce and state. And all these financial speculations, and here's the problem with mixing commerce with the state. You look at, for example, when you mix commercial education with the state. You mix commercial education with the state. That means education for the money, and then some state starts picking up the tab for this education for money. So a lot of this education is useless, becomes useless education, but the state is still picking up the money, picking up the tab. Somebody else is making the money, the guy who's having that educational institute, but the state keeps lending money. The state keeps lending money for these guys to be enslaved to the state, because they own that money to the state. I mean, this education, if it's a needed education, I understand some education needs to be supported, but if it's a needed education, the money will come from somewhere for it. There is no need for the state to issue loans. Why the parents of these kids aren't making enough money so they don't they can pay for the children's education? What is this loan about? Is it a loan of servitude? Is it a loan of, oh, you owe us this money, you better start working, you better start doing something, you lazy bumfuck? Well, the lazy bumfuck, now his job is a lot of their jobs are more or less automated. So you're putting pressure on people who are, they cannot all be, computer programmers. The cognitive ability, many is not there. You're pushing them into working in work that is, does not, suit them. And then, this state, this educational system that is producing, it's sort of like, if you pay privately, then you get a good education that is useful somewhere. If if the government is willing to pay for it, then you got to look for the use of this education. Was the education useful or not, and why is somebody paying for this education? Why the parents are not making enough to pay for it? Why do they have to become loners before they start working? But with this pay per play education, they're making people in debt. They're putting people in debt before they make a dime. Sort of like, oh, you come here, you go in debt, now go start working. You come take out a big chunk of money, loan for your education, and then big chunk of loan for your car, and then big chunk of loan for your house. Now go start working for 30, 40, 50 years, 60 years. But the point is, then there's no more work. There's less and less work every day. So the whole idea of putting people under debt for an education where there is probably not going to be any work for it is a silly act. So commerce in this case is being silly, They are using the government. You see, when the commerce and the government, when the commerce and state intertwine, somehow the state starts paying for education that is worthless, because there are elements they have mixed at their top brass level. There are, it's normal for some of the private sector for money education be sprinkled every time the president changes. Some new ones are sprinkled into the system at the top layer to have influence over policy. So the whole idea of going in depth for for an education becomes normal in a society, because people in debt are good source of income. If you can get people in debt, they work for you very hard. If they're not in debt, maybe they have time to sit back and think. Maybe do something else a little. Pay attention to the rest of the society, the rest of their families, the rest of their communities. I mean, if you're working them 10 hours a day, 6 days a week, they won't have any time for communities. One of the main reasons the neighbors don't know each other's names is because they're working so hard. If you don't know the name of your neighbor in many cases, or you don't have their phone number, or not in daily communication with them, then you're working too hard. End of story. Humans they have forced humans through this slavery, through debt. They have made the commerce. I'm talking about the commerce. This not the state. This is commerce. Job is to put people in debt. Now the commerce is using the state to pull people in debt. The state should not help commerce. This is what I'm saying. The state should not help commerce. Not only the state should not help commerce to put people in debt, but state should try to prevent commerce from putting people in debt. Just like the state prevents the church from, having corruption. The whole church is corruption. Just like the government prevents prostitution by the church. If a church starts doing prostitution, government comes up, stops them, and say, hey, no, you can't do that. Just like that, while putting people in debt, which is the main way commerce makes money, that should somehow be curbed by the government. For one thing, student loans should not be handed out. It's sort of like, no, we're not going to give you any student loans. If these people need an education, you need to bring your prices down in order to give them an education. You can't charge them so much because we are not going to pay, and see if they have enough money to pay you. If they don't have enough money, you close your doors. We don't need an education. The answer to all this bullshit education, private education, which government is loaning the money, there shouldn't be any. Hey, if this education is worth something, they will pay. And if they're not paying because obviously your prices are too high. You're charging $50,000 for a course in what? A year? $50,000 for a course in law? A year. Well, good luck, because the government is not picking up the tab. Sallie Mae is not, insuring is not going to insure that money. So that loan is going to be very volatile. So nobody is going to lend the money. So that university has to say, oh, did we say $50,000 a year? We meant $500 a year with complimentary pizza. Because if they still want to teach, they bring their prices to as low as the students can afford. Period. End of story. That's if nobody is willing to pick up the loan. But when the state and the commerce are intertwined, of course state, of course, the commerce is going to twist the hand of the state to pick up the loans. Another example, defense. These heads of defense industry, the private sector, keeps receiving, taking in, civil servant, ex-civil servant at high positions. Before, they used to be in the government at high positions. I guess, they were promised good positions after they retire and get out of the government, and what they actually get good positions at the board of trustees level of the arms manufacturers, corporations that produce arms. So you're thinking to yourself that, again, commerce mixing with the state. In this case, commerce regarding swords, missiles, whatever, arms. So what happens is that there becomes this ever more need for assertiveness and wars, and we have to show them who we are, and it's all being peddled by these arms salesmen, because the more there is friction in the world, the more they make money. So you mix the commerce side of the arms industry, that's the commerce side, with the government, that's the military and the overseers of the military. You sprinkle some of these into there and some of them into this mixing of, again, state and commerce, in this case defense industry. That's why we have so many wars. That's why the guns are allowed everywhere. That's why there are so many, at the top level of these state organizations that are so intertwined with the commercial side of that, what they preach, that what they control as the state, that a lot of unkosher policies come into effect, unkosher, unwritten policy of, yes, we have to show them how big our penis is, and we have to show them who's the boss. And because that sells weapons. This whole sort of, on the other side, paranoia. No, they're gonna get us. They're coming for us. Who the fuck? No, they don't like us. They don't like us, our freedom. They don't like us. They don't like our freedom. Dude, if they didn't like you, my pink-skinned friends of Northern Hemisphere, if the fucking Southern Hemisphere people didn't like you, they wouldn't have bought, Hollywood would not have such a good business. A lot of this money that Hollywood makes, most of the money that Hollywood makes is from overseas. Those motherfuckers love you. This whole idea is they don't like us, they don't love us, this is bullshit. All around the planet, people like Americans and Europeans and North Americans, all over the world. So there is no, as long as they're left alone, they're doing their thing. They don't, if they're left alone, it's like, shit. If you leave shit alone, shit that is sitting there, a pile of shit that is sitting there, if you leave it alone, it doesn't produce much smell, because it dries out, crusted all around it. It's dry crust, and it doesn't put out much smell after a while. Huh? But if you go over there and mix it with a branch, and mix the hard one with the soft ones, and bring the soft ones to the surface, it's gonna start stinking again. That's the way you treat Taliban. Leave it there and don't touch it. They're there. Eventually, their society will evolve to higher places than where it is today, but they have to go at their own speed. But the point of we have to go and rescue them is because the state and commerce have intertwined too much. In that case, it was education department and the commercial side of education. In this case, it was the defense department and the commercial side of the defense industry. We can go on and on. We can go on. Oil business, the oil commerce, the commerce of oil. It's so bad that no wonder people start distrusting the government. Because here's the thing, we know that the oil industry twisted the arm of the automobile industry not to pursue electrical vehicles 100 years ago. About 150, no, maybe 50, 60 years ago, the automobile companies started researching and developing batteries for automobiles. And they actually put cars on the road with lead acid batteries. But still, it was research and development into battery. What can we do? Here's what we can do now. Maybe in 10 years from now, we can do 100 times better. But the whole idea was killed, shot in the barrel by the oil industry. They just went to the car industry and said, shut it up, smash it. Because, they need to sell oil. This is the money that every day we pay extra as a tax on our life, because an oil company wanted to make this money. Wanted to take this money out of my pocket. So what they did is they twisted the automobile company's arm into not pursuing electric cars, which were cheaper to run, easier on the environment, with less noise and less. They stopped them from pursuing that, and the government turned a blind eye. This is the problem when you mix commerce and the state. Then when commerce is trying to blackmail the middle guy into continuing with the gasoline powered cars, because that's the stuff they sell. If people start using electric cars, then they have to they have to lubricate their ass with the oil. The point is this: they did not do anything. The government, the state, turned a blind eye onto the blackmail. All regular people didn't notice this. You think the state didn't notice that GM pulled 100 electric cars that it had produced and put on the road? You think the state didn't notice that the company pulled 100 cars back and crushed them, asked for them back and crushed them? End of story. Finito. No questions asked. We decided to cancel. I guess that was as far as the GM went. And the government didn't do any, investigation. Government knew. Everybody knew. It happened. So the government, in this case, is intertwined with the oil industry. Executives from oil industry have been from this administration to that administration to the next administration. Different oil companies, different presidents. One of them like this oil company, one of this sister, another, president like the other sisters. So different executives of different oil companies were sprinkled all over. The, Ministry of Energy, Secretary of Energy, Department of Energy. These executives were sparkled from time to time. Every president sparkled their own flavor of oil executives into the department, and then whoever graduated from that department, retired from those departments, were wined and dined. Before they retired, they were wined and dined, and after they retired, many of them found incomes, places in organizations related to the oil industry. And nobody does any research about that. The government also doesn't go after them. It's like, oh, why is this guys have been given this job with this much salary, and did you owe them any favors? It's sort of like, no, we don't talk about it. But they owed favors or they did not owe favors. It's nobody's business. But then you see that's such a big example of the government turning a blind eye. There is a possibility for people to breathe cleaner air, less noise, spend less money, more of their productivity, spend more of their productivity on the thing that puts money in a pocket of a few companies. One company, the oil guy. Every morning that I go to work, I have to pay the oil guy. Imagine that every morning you get up. For the past, how many years have you been driving a car? Every morning that you get up, there is this oil company executive in your gas station. Every morning you have to go put $100 in his pocket, or $50 or $20 in his pocket. Every morning. He takes that money, gives a cut to the government, and takes the rest to the bank. And to keep this going, there was a chance that this hadn't happened. But this $20 that I'm paying for that oil, that's my productivity. That's going into somebody else's pocket that didn't have to. If it was an electric car 100 years ago, 50 years ago, 30 years ago, 2 years ago, 10 years ago, if there was an electric car, this money, this transaction, this part of my productivity would not go to an oil company. Through a backdoor deal. And the government turned a blind eye. It's like, nope, we don't see here no evil, we don't hear no evil. It's all evil. So many healths have been ruined because of, whatever comes out of the back pipe of a machine after it burns fossil fuel. Why do you think people are suspicious of the vaccine and anything that is connected to the government? Because they see these grand policies that the government went with the commerce. What benefits the commerce? Not what benefits the people, but what benefits the commerce. Again, the state and commerce needs to be separated, just like state is separated from the church. State and commerce must become before we blow ourselves to kingdom come, because of the defense commerce is a big commerce. It's big business, and that can actually if we can let the oil industry continue the way it has, we're going to eventually drown. But then defense industry can blow us up. And worse than both, the education industry has left a considerable portion of the society uneducated. The for-profit, the commerce side of education. Folks, you can have commerce side of education, you can have for-profit universities, but the government should not be insuring any of that. The government should not be allowing anybody to charge $50,000 for an education by allowing any kind of loans to take effect. And if your university is charging so much, then you only get those students that have that much to pay in cash from their parents. Obviously they can't pay that themselves, but then you understand that these people who when they graduate and go into commerce, they cannot go into state. Commerce and the same way it's silly. This is back to my first point. As silly as it is, that we understand that it's silly that if next administration picks Bishop Joe as to run the transportation department, just as silly as it is that Bishop Joe has no business, because he's a bishop, he has a church connection, so he has no business running the transportation department or education department or energy department, because he's a clergy. The same way we should make it unacceptable for executives or anybody in commerce to become secretary of this or secretary of that, or undersecretary for this or undersecretary. Political positions cannot come from commerce. They can only come from academia. End of story. Separate before commerce gets us all killed. We have to separate state from commerce. Before commerce gets us all killed, because here's the thing, the Chinese are not saying, have you noticed the Chinese are not saying that we're gonna blow all of you motherfuckers up? But people on Fox News are already saying that we should make mountains out of Chinese skulls. So we both understand who's the aggressor in that deal. I think the reason is because the defense commerce in China is not intertwined with the state. Mr. Pompeo in his previous years was the head, or he started, or we bought into some kind of a defense company related to defense. Then Secretary of State, and now back to commerce, wherever he is right now. My point is this is mixing commerce with the state. You don't want to mix commerce with the state. That's when things go haywire. That's when student loan approved by the government becomes a thing. That's when Halliburton makes a lot of money over a war, a couple of wars that really didn't make any sense. Holding them could have been done with simpler solutions would have done. In case of, for example, Bin Laden, the last solution was the simplest solution. Eventually they threw hard work, they identified, and then they took care of business at the quiet of the night, with I guess no casualties. I mean, what was done by the commandos, if it was done at all, and if the whole story is true, what was done was basically what could have been eventually done without taking over large pieces of geography. It's like one man in a shithole like Afghanistan. How hard is it to find? After you give it a couple of years, you will eventually find it. But without having to deal with the fucking Taliban. But my point is this is when the whole reason for these wars is because Halliburton needs to make money, other defense companies make money, they all have employees, they all have campaign contributions to these folks that get elected. So they all need to make money. They all, so heads of commerce and heads of state become intertwined. Most of them make money, make profit from this intertwining. The losers are the people. Just like in the Dark Ages, the church was very fat and happy, so was the state fat and happy, but the losers were people, us. Our situation was much worse then. Believe me, it's great now. We are kings now. But comparing to what was then, because not only commerce was up our ass through the state, but church was up our ass through the state as well. So at least we have pulled pulled church out of our ass. Now all we need to do is to pull commerce out of our ass. Just the state is enough to keep the system in order. Just the state is enough. We don't need the church and we don't need commerce to be in there. And we see all these shortcomings. I think it's just